Have you ever struggled with addiction? Chances are, if you haven't personally, you definitely know someone who has. If you include alcohol, which you should, a reported 25% of adults in America struggle with some type of substance abuse. That's 1 in 4. So addiction is a big deal, which is why addiction is one of the most highly studied areas of human sciences. But this isn't an episode about addiction or substance abuse. It's an episode about how we can use what we learn in those areas to help creating positive change in your life while cutting out negative habits that are holding you back, regardless of what they are. Welcome to Change Made Easy. Changing your habits, routines, and behaviors is hard. We make it easy. I'm Paul Levitin, a coach of over 12 years who has been helping people just like you create positive change in their health, wealth, and relationships. Demi Lovato said, "Recovery is something that you have to work on every single day, and it's something that doesn't get a day off." But the reality is, this isn't just about drugs, or alcohol, or addiction. That's everything in life. Life never stops. Whatever it is you're trying to change, to build, or improve, you have to keep working on it, day in and day out. And if you want to learn more about this, listen to the episode Chop the Wood, Carry the Water, which I've linked in the show notes. But today, I'm going to explain to you how what we know about addiction can help you live a happier, healthier life, and what you can learn from rats and Army veterans to better understand why it is you do what you do and how you can use that information to build better, healthier habits. I've studied the science of behavior change for close to a decade now. And in that time, one of the topics that I've read and learned the most about is addiction science. And this isn't because I've struggled with addictive tendencies myself, I have, or because I have family members who are addicts, which I do. And although my education around this topic has helped me understand both them and myself better, I've studied addiction because, simply put, talking about addiction and substances and how they affect us and our decision making is like playing the game of behavior change on the highest difficulty level, because nothing is more high stakes than addiction. So when you learn habit science by learning about addiction, it's like learning to play basketball against LeBron James. Anyone else you play against after that is going to be a breeze. So let's start with the definition of addiction. Addiction is defined as a chronic, relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive behavior related to the use of substances or engagement in activities despite harmful consequences. I know that's a lot, so we can shorten that a little and take out the substance part, and that leaves us with addiction is a compulsive behavior despite harmful consequences. So basically, doing something over and over to your own detriment, which sounds like drinking too much or smoking cigarettes, but to me, that can also sound like self-sabotage, like continually binge eating even though it has negative health consequences, or spending all of your time playing video games or watching Netflix even though it hurts your finances or your fitness. So we can take what we know about addiction and apply it more broadly to creating positive change in your life. A big part of which is letting go of the negative habits that are holding you back, even if those habits aren't as harmful as alcoholism or smoking crack. Hey, real quick, we'll be back to the show in just a few seconds, but right now I have to tell you about the free Change Made Easy private Facebook community. If you want to join hundreds of change seekers just like you and get free trainings, resources, and direct help from me in order to help make your quest for change easy, then click the link in the show notes that says Facebook group now. You'll be directed to my private Facebook group that I created just for clients and listeners of this podcast. And as a bonus, you'll get a free hour-long training on eliminating self-sabotage. All you have to do is click Facebook group in whatever podcast app you're listening on right now. Okay, let's get back to the show. So if we zoom out of that conventional view of addiction being about only drugs and alcohol and view it more broadly as taking actions over and over counter to your own best interests, then I'd be hard-pressed to find even a single person who couldn't benefit from learning about how to combat that. And one of my favorite books is called Willpower Doesn't Work. And if you listen to the show a lot, I talk about it all the time. It's in my top 10 books of all time. And it was written by Dr. Benjamin Hardy after his struggles with addiction personally and with his family. And the main premise of the book is surprise, surprise, willpower doesn't work. And Dr. Hardy basically says that by trying to change by only relying on willpower, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because willpower is a finite resource, so it's always going to run out eventually. And it doesn't matter if you're trying to drink less alcohol or less soda, if you're trying to do less scrolling or less hard drugs. Simply resisting is not an ideal route to success. That's not really anything new, but then what is the solution? While Dr. Hardy outlines several key factors in the book, the one that he builds the most on is environment. The people, the places, the things around you culminate effectively to shape your life. They say a lot, you can't outwork a bad diet. But the truth is, you can't outwork a negative environment. And that's not just talking about diet and weight loss. While this doesn't mean you can't control your own destiny, it does mean that fighting against your environment is truly an uphill battle. And to hammer this point home, I'm going to tell you about two famous addiction experiments, one having to do with rats and one having to do with veterans. So we start during the Vietnam War. The government here in the US had a problem. It seemed that while overseas, a large amount of soldiers had began using heroin while they were fighting in Vietnam. And when I say a large amount, some estimates say that fully 20% of the soldiers sent to Vietnam by the US were on heroin. That's 1 out of 5. And as the US began to wind down the war effort and start to bring these young heroes home, they also knew that heroin was extremely addictive. And then President Nixon at the time was also simultaneously launching the war on drugs. So this was looking up to be a problem. And the last thing the US government wanted was to flood the streets with tens of thousands of veteran heroin addicts and create a huge public health crisis. So what they did was initiate a project called Operation Golden Flow, which is literally a drug testing program. So soldiers had to test clean with clean urine before they could leave Vietnam and return home. And most of the soldiers did. But that's where it gets interesting. Because when those soldiers returned home, out of the tens of thousands who had been on heroin in Vietnam, only about 5% continued using once they got back to the US. And those 5% tended to be the ones who were already using before they had gone to Vietnam in the first place. That means that tens of thousands of users of one of the most addictive drugs known to man all quit pretty much overnight, cold turkey. Interesting. Then, experiment 2. A few years later, there was something in a research park in British Columbia that would become to be known as Rat Park. So, for well over 100 years now, scientists have been running experiments on rats to understand substances and addiction. And a common one you've probably seen videos of is where they stick a rat in a cage with 2 water bottles. And one will be filled with water, and the other is filled with water spiked with some type of drug. Maybe heroin, maybe crack, maybe whatever. And what they'd see is that over time, the rats would drink the drugged water and they'd get addicted to it. And they'd end up drinking it so much that they would overdose and die. And these experiments were often used as proof to show that drugs are so addictive that once you're exposed to them, you're done for. Like animals would literally choose drugs over life itself. But then a researcher named Dr. Bruce Alexander asked, what if it's not just about the drugs? What if it's about the rat's environment? So he created what he called Rat Park. It was basically like a theme park for rats. It had everything: food, toys, other rats to socialize with. It had space. And it also had drugs. Basically, instead of setting the rats up in isolation in a gray, empty cage where there was literally nothing to do but either drink water or drink drug-laced water, these rats were given options. So what do you think happened next? Well, the rats in Rat Park had access to the same drug-laced water, but most of them didn't touch it. They drank the regular water instead. And the rats that were stuck in the isolated cage with just gray walls and nothing around them, well, they kept chugging the drugged water until they overdosed and died, just like in all the experiments they had before. So when the only options were drugs or no drugs, the rats chose drugs. But when the options were drugs or no drugs, but a fulfilling life filled with socialization and exercise and room to run around, then the drugs lost much of their appeal. So what do these two stories about drugs have to do with each other, and what do they have to do with you? Well, what we learned from Operation Golden Flow in Vietnam was that soldiers were under extreme stress and had easy access to drugs. But once they returned to their homes, with the support of their family and a different day-to-day life and away from the stress of literal war, many of them, it seemed, didn't feel the need to use heroin anymore, and they were able to just quit. In the rat park experiment, we see that it was not the drugs that were so addicting and intoxicating, it was that they were so addicting and intoxicating and that the rats had nothing better to do. They had no other viable option for fulfillment or joy, so of course they would choose drugs. In both experiments, a change in environment led to a change in behavior. So the common thread we see here is that your environment plays a massive role in shaping your behavior, especially when it comes to addiction and changing these deeply ingrained behaviors. It is not just about willpower or avoiding substances or whatever habit you're trying to break. It's about what's going on around you, what is happening in your environment. And we can take these addiction experiments and apply them to the broader spectrum of all human struggles. Maybe your challenge is snacking less, or reducing late night Netflixing, or too much TikTok scrolling when you should be working. No matter the habit, the science is clear. The environment you put yourself in matters more than you think. If you're constantly surrounded by stress, temptation, or people who encourage those type of behaviors, then change becomes very hard. But if you curate your environment and you surround yourself with support and positivity and other people with healthy habits, and you make it easier for you to do those habits, you give yourself the best possible chance for success. So with that, my action step for you this week is to begin to curate your environment. Take any habit you're trying to limit or get rid of and ask yourself, how is my environment complicit in making this habit easier? Like the Vietnam veterans who had easy access to heroin and nothing better to do, you can look at your environment to see how it's nudging you towards the habit you're trying to break. And then ask yourself how you can flip the switch to make your environment work against that habit instead. An example might be not keeping the snacks you're trying to avoid in your house. If your pantry is always stocked with Oreos and you're trying to eat less cookies, simply by not buying Oreos and bringing them into your house, you're changing your environment in a way that is more conducive to that goal. Then you can ask yourself, how can you make your environment more friendly towards the habit you are trying to create? Like the rats in Rat Park being given more options to socialize, to have fun, to play, so they didn't have to only go to the drugs. A classic example of curating your environment in this way is if you're trying to drink more water, leave a glass of water on your nightstand at night so that first thing in the morning when you wake up, you already have water ready for you and you can chug a glass of water and get 16 ounces right away. Remember what Dr. Benjamin Hardy said. Willpower does not work. It doesn't matter if you're a best-selling author and a doctor, a veteran, or a rat. If you want to make changing your habits easy, it starts with curating your environment. That is change made easy. Don't forget about the free Change Made Easy private Facebook community. Come join hundreds of change seekers just like you and receive free trainings, resources, and direct help from me that will help make your quest for change easy. Just go into the show notes of whatever app you're on right now and click the link that says Facebook group. You'll be directed to my private Facebook community that's just for clients and listeners of this podcast. And as a bonus, you'll get a free hour-long training on eliminating self-sabotage. All you have to do is click Facebook group in whatever app you're listening on right now.